Hello friends, are you looking for the ultimate low-carb lasagna recipe that just happens to be gluten-free and really easy on the blood sugars? Well, I've had type 1 diabetes for 42 years and I am always searching for good recipes for my blood sugar levels. This one happens to be one of my favorites. The recipe is amazing. If you keep watching, I'll walk you through step by step and share with you what I was holding in my hand on that picture you clicked on. So you'll need some of the ingredients here. As you can see, I chose really high quality ingredients. The higher quality the ingredient, especially the sauces, tend to be lower in carb. The marinara sauce that I purchased actually is really low in carb and super delicious. For half a cup of that, it has only 3 grams of net carb. I also choose really high quality protein. It's a little bit expensive, but when I make this dish, I usually choose grass-fed beef. I've also substituted other meats like turkey before and other sauces in the past and had pretty decent success. But to keep it low carb, I choose the ones I chose on this video here. I will post the recipe in the description of the video as well for easy access. So don't worry about it if you're missing. You don't have to take notes. So let's dive in. First thing you do whenever you're cooking anything is you turn the oven on to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Fill 2 pots with water, the big pot and the small pot, and you toss the tomatoes in some olive oil, 3 cloves of garlic. Don't peel it, just throw it all in there together. You can smash it a bit if you want. And then you place it on a baking sheet. I didn't have any parchment paper, which I usually use, so I'm just gonna have to scrub the sheet afterwards. Throw it in the oven for 30 minutes. So while the tomatoes are roasting, let's get started on the rest. So grab that mystery food here. As you can see, it's a celeriac root or celery root, an amazing low carb substitute. As you can see by the nutritional profile on Google, and here I posted it, it's pretty awesome. One piece or 1/8 of this lasagna has approximately 7.5 to 8.5 grams of carb if you use the ingredients I'm using today. If you use some of the higher carb sauces, it's gonna be a little bit higher. But still, for a chunk of lasagna like this one, it tastes phenomenal. It's totally worth it. So let's get to cutting the celery root. You basically cut the outer layer off. As you can see, it's quite tough to cut. It's a root vegetable, so it's really, really tough skinned, but not too bad if you have a sharp knife. So you peel off the outer coating. I usually cut off the complete bottom. That looks like an alien tentacle thing. It's kind of gross, but I do that because it just makes it easier and it's flat, so it's easier to cut. So you do that and then you trim off all of the edges like that, like so, and then you cut it into squares. So you slice it as thin as possible and then you continue to cut it into a square-like noodle type shape. Doesn't have to be perfect. When I first tried making this recipe years ago, I tried to make them perfect noodle sizes, but it doesn't really matter. It all tastes the same anyways. So you put the square chunks in the big pot like so, and then you put the smaller chunks, the leftover bits, the edges, whatever you want to call them, into the smaller bowl. And then you place them on the stove and set it to boil. So while that's boiling, you add some olive oil into the frying pan, get that heated up. So put that on there, and then as we're waiting for that to heat up, I cut up an onion like so. I'm no expert chef. I've done a lot of chopping in my days, so chop that up, throw that in the frying pan, let it saute until it's translucent or see-through for about 6 to 8 minutes. And then I grab some garlic. Yeah, I like garlic, so 3 to 4. It calls for 3 typically, but I sometimes throw in 5 to be honest. And minced, of course, until you smell it. And then once you smell it, you add the package of meat and then chop up the meat into little bits. You want to make sure it's small, like it's going to be a sauce. So chop it up fine little bits of meat, and it actually cooks a little bit quicker too if you do that. And then once it's cooked and brown, and you don't see any red bits in the middle, I add the basil. So the basil, if you can't find good fresh basil, which is kind of hard to find sometimes depending on where you live, then I just use the tube stuff. So you add the basil, you add, I'm pretty generous with it. I like the taste of basil, but you don't want to overdo it. And then oregano, salt and pepper to taste. So let that soak in, cook a little bit longer. Don't let it dry out. If you do find it's drying out, you can add a little bit of beef broth. That's part of the recipe, and I use that in a minute for something else. So now I add a couple tablespoons of, as you can see here, I'm cracking open a can of tomato paste, throw in a couple tablespoons of that, and that gives it that nice tomatoey taste. You don't need a lot. So looks like the tomatoes are done in the oven, so we pull those out, put them aside, let them cool a little bit, and then we pull the boiled celery root and celery bits off the stove. And what I like to do is put some paper towel down on a cutting board and lay out the celery root fake noodle, I call them, onto the the paper towel, and it just dries them out. Makes it easier to use later. So while that's happening, we want to take and strain or use a strainer spoon and put the little bits and chunks into the blender to puree the rest of the celery root, like so. So you want to puree that up. It's a bit tricky sometimes. And I add a bit of beef broth just to make it mix in a little bit easier, and a couple tablespoons of butter. So it's quite delicious. I could actually eat this stuff spoon over spoon on its own. Okay, now we have all the ingredients cooked and ready to assemble into a lasagna. This is the fun stuff. This is where the art comes in. So first thing you do is you layer the bottom of the dish with 1/3 of the celery root, like so, and then you add half the meat sauce. Now add the marinara sauce, and I don't measure. I probably should, but I don't. I just sort of pour it and make sure it's evenly distributed over the top. And like I mentioned earlier, this brand has 3 grams of net carbs per half cup, which is pretty phenomenal. Now I add the 1/3 of cooked tomatoes, and then I add the pureed celery root in the middle. Kind of like the stuff, it kind of mimics a cottage cheese layer or ricotta cheese or whatever types of cheese others use in traditional lasagna dishes. My mom used to make a lasagna dish with cottage cheese, so kind of does the same thing. Now a layer of mozzarella cheese. Of course, you can't have a lasagna without mozzarella cheese, and I'm pretty generous with it too. Another layer of celery root, like so, and the rest of the grass-fed meat sauce. More of that delicious marinara sauce, and 1/3 of the cooked tomatoes. I usually use a bigger tomato, but they didn't have any, so I used the cherry tomatoes. Cover the layered masterpiece with the rest of the celery root, more mozzarella cheese, and then you add a hit of amazing, it's a Parmesan cheese, and I'm gonna butcher the name, Parmigiana Reggiano. Anyways, it's a hard Parmesan cheese that's really expensive but really tasty. Last of the garlic roasted tomatoes on the top. Kind of makes it look pretty, and then throw it in the oven for 30 minutes at 350 degrees. Check it out. And like all lasagnas, it's even better the next day. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out my crustless quiche recipe video here. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.